Beg to Differ is brought to you by Saltire Energy, who continue to lead the way in the oil industry when it comes to specialist rental equipment. By Lux Scott, a jet-class luxury vehicle company who continue to make giant strides when it comes to luxury travel and service. By Fowler Mackenzie, formed in 2001, the longest established calcip standing seam system in Scotland, here for all your roofing and cladding needs. And by HCS, a Scottish organisation focused on delivering the best IWOCS solutions, bespoke controls equipment and supporting services to the oil and gas industry. Hi everybody, a very warm welcome to this brand new edition of Beg to Differ. If you're watching for the very first time, this is where I gather a group of Aberdeen fans together over Zoom and we discuss any given month. This episode is all about January, which in terms for Aberdeen Football Club was simply horrific. If you can bear it, let's remind you what happened. So we played 6, we won 1, we drew 1, but we lost 4. We only scored 3 goals and conceded 14, which meant we had the worst defensive record in the Premiership. And we were knocked out the Scottish Cup by Minnows Darvel. It meant that manager Jim Goodwin was sacked after losing 6-0 to Hibs at Easter Road. Barry Robson, Steve Agnew and Scott Anderson were placed in interim charge. So that is where we are at. So without further ado, let's introduce to you today's guests. Guys, it's fantastic to see you all. Thank you so much for jumping on. So let me do the introduction. So first of all, over here, Terry McDermott, huge Aberdeen fan. We've got a bit of an international flavour tonight. Terry's in New Orleans, is the lead singer of a superb band called Lotus Crush and found fame on The Voice edition in the US. Down here is Jonathan Northcroft, Sunday Times football correspondent, and down there is Rachel Corsie, captain of Aston Villa and Scotland, currently in Spain, preparing for Scotland's games this week. So thank you so much for jumping on. As you can see, I'm not in my studio, which I normally am, because I'm in deepest Austria. Kids have got a week off. This week, we're renovating. Oh, the joys. To go with what was a horrific month for Aberdeen Football Club. So, Rachel, I would like to start with you. In your lifetime, have you ever known anything like it?
Oh, there are a few sad memories of days at Pittodrie, I must say. I do think probably watching the defeat to Darvel was firstly a moment I almost broke my laptop, but also it was tough because I'm quite a vocal Aberdeen fan amongst my peers, and obviously you can imagine being in the national team, there's a few who support other teams. And so I probably got quite a bit of stick, but it was just that it was a probably a really tough few weeks, really. I don't think it was, maybe for me it felt like as much as a month, but I think I was at the cup semi-final, and then what followed from there, I think the Hearts result into Darvel, into Hibs, I think it was those 3 games really that I feel was it was a very difficult but also a very intense few days, and I think that probably brought a darker cloud over it. Had perhaps those games been over a wider period of time, I think the intensity and how quickly they came back to back was really, really tough on the club and everyone involved. You know, it would have absolutely been horrible for the players, of course the coaching staff, the rest of the staff of the club, and then obviously all the fans who invest so much time and their money as well into it. That was hard. I think it was really hard.
Jonathan, the manner in which Jim Goodwin lost his job, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. It didn't sit very well with a number of Aberdeen fans, that sort of weeks period when we went from Darvel into the Hibs game, and then we see Jim Goodwin getting sacked 19 minutes after the Hibs defeat. The whole handling of the situation, I think, could have been dealt with a lot better. What do you think?
I have to agree. I mean, it felt like Darvel was the lowest you could possibly go, and I think it is. I mean, that we'll be talking about. People will be talking about it after we've all gone. It is the lowest the club could surely go. The most farcical result in any club of any note's history. To be quite honest, it's hard to find a parallel anywhere, I think. And that's how bad it was. But it felt that after that, it was like we had to then go through another week of nonsense and another week of humiliation. It just felt like an extension of the pain and an extension of the, I suppose, the sort of clown show element of it. I mean, I work in England. Some of my colleagues know I'm an Aberdeen fan. Others don't even know what Aberdeen is. They're fixed on the Premier League. But Darvel put us on the map in the worst possible way, and suddenly everyone wanted to have their kind of tuppence worth. And then you'd get the question, so you haven't sacked the manager yet then? And you had to kind of go into the whole, well, it's not really how the club's been run recently. And then the Hibs result, the Hibs game, which I think we could have all of us, we could have predicted that it was going to be a disaster. It was going to be a further humiliation. It was going to be a humiliation for Jim Goodwin, to be quite honest, as much as anything else, torture. And then for him to be sacked, for Dave Cormack to give that emotional interview afterwards, the whole thing just felt like further horror, and it didn't give you any more confidence. It gave you less confidence even than you felt after Darvel, because what was needed after Darvel was to draw a line, be decisive, and start a proper process of rebuilding the club and making some sensible decisions. And that's not what we got at all. So thankfully, Jim's exit was quick after that. But that Saturday night just felt like another low. And I actually think that kicked on to what happened after that in the St Mirren game. It still felt like we were in sort of shambles. It was almost like threw two more results away after Darvel. That's how it felt like.
Terry, you and I were texting each other during this whole period, and you and I were texting each other actually during the Darvel game, not quite believing what we were watching. And then we started texting each other in the days preceding the Darvel result, and also not quite believing what was going on. What felt for me was that Jim Goodwin was a dead man walking, and that didn't sit comfortable with me and many, many fans. How did it sit with you?
I think at the time, like any Aberdeen fan that watched the game, if you're unlucky enough to actually watch the game, I mean, spare a thought for the Aberdeen punters that actually went down there in that stadium and spent their money to go down. But I mean, there was almost a sense of disbelief, and that only extended afterwards. I really could not believe that Jim Goodwin was not given his marching orders. I take no pleasure in saying that. I mean, I met Jim when I was in Atlanta to watch the friendly. And, these guys are all doing their best. They're all doing their absolute best for the club. They want it to work. But when it's not working and a result like that comes up, I just don't think there's a path back. I don't think you can really ever come back from that. I think the fans have very long memory. Scottish football certainly has a very long memory. And there was a sense, I think, that everything that had led up to that point was not pretty. It was not as if Darvel was some massive one-off. It had been a very, very bad run. And the fact that professional footballers playing for arguably Scotland's third team could not muster more than they did on that pitch suggests that whether you can put your finger on what was wrong or whether you can't, it doesn't really matter. It clearly wasn't working, and it was time to change it. So there was a sense of disbelief, I think, that the Hibernian game had Jim in charge. I think the club genuinely wanted him to do well. I think they wanted him to turn it around, but I don't think any of us had that optimism, and that disaster just compounded it, and really, really, really put the final nail in the coffin. Not that it needed any; it was over long before that. So yeah, I think hindsight is 2020, of course, but I think that moment there is where it should have been clear to all that the standards of the club had fallen too low, and that manager had to go. Just had to basically empty out the drawer, on you go, shake the hands, and start again. And I think that's probably what should have happened.
Rachel, I always felt in the games leading up to particularly Hearts, Hibs, Darvel, that the manager by this point had already lost the capacity to manage the team, and it was becoming a real concern of mine. But I don't think we can just blame Jim Goodwin here, because the players, we see Falkirk beating Darvel comfortably, more than comfortably. Yet we can't muster that type of performance. So the players surely must take a huge amount of responsibility on their own shoulders, give themselves a real shake, and actually start to wonder why they were put in this situation where they just simply could not play, I think, for Jim Goodwin. So for you, how much responsibility should they take for this?
Yeah, I think it's a few things on that, really. I think it's difficult to ever know when you're on the outside.
Sure.
I mean, being a player, it's difficult to know from the outside what the true feeling is. And if the players genuinely had lost the buy-in of the manager, I agree. I've been in environments where that's been the case, and it can't go forward, and that's happened to some of the best managers there are. And whenever that does happen, it is a case of they have to go. And it's hard to kind of tell, because there has been kind of mixed messages and sort of multiple messages that suggest the players did enjoy it. They did have passion for what they were trying to do, and it did seem like it was a collective journey. But the other thing on that, I think, in Jim Goodwin's case specifically, is he clearly was a manager that felt comfortable to make bold decisions, and he did that from the get-go. He put a lot of markers down of, I always kind of think back to the Andy Considine one, which I don't want us to dwell way back, but I'll always remember that because it was one of the first things he did. And I think Andy's, he's always he grew up playing for Aberdeen. He's loved the club. He's played, I wouldn't want to misquote it, but he's one of the most all-time appearance makers for the club. His family all have grown up in the north. That was a big thing, and people from the north are loyal, and I think that was a bold move to make, and that's not a criticism of that move. He felt it was something he needed to do at the time. But I think when you start to do these things, you do probably draw more scrutiny onto yourself, because naturally the fans who are connected to the club I remember that. That's something I remember. That's something I think about when I think of Jim Goodwin was the Aberdeen manager. That's a moment that sticks with me, and it sticks with me because I'm an Aberdeen person and I love the football club. And I don't like to think that there's been, some kind of friction and fracture to the group. And who knows the whole ins and outs of that instance too. But I just think from Jim's perspective, he probably did end up incurring probably a little more scrutiny and criticism, because he was willing to make bold decisions. And that goes both ways. If things were going well, he had the right to be like, I'm the man in charge. But obviously when things don't go well, things can sort of, the hammer comes down on you pretty quickly, especially in football. But going back to the original question, I think the players do hold responsibility for their performances. I think the Hearts performance, I was very surprised that a lot of those players that started that day had played close to 120 minutes in the cup semi-final on a pitch that, honestly, from being in the stands and watching it, I think I just about had calf cramp by the end of the game. So how those boys then managed to go up the road or go along the M8, try and recover, and then get back on the pitch again, playing against a fresh team who's on great form, I felt that was extremely tough. And it was 4-0 at half time, and I think that reflected the fact that the guys were just dead on their feet playing away from home. It's not an excuse, but I also think, I don't think they didn't try. I just think it was something that was difficult circumstances. The Darvel game again, you don't have that excuse. You're playing a team that trains part-time, or nowhere near your level. So yeah, on that specific occasion, you have to find something within you. You will be tired. You won't like it. The level of the league down there, even though it's lower leagues, a lot of those players are good players. So it is tough. It's tough, but I think that game specifically, that game was more on the players, because you need to find a way to win, and it doesn't matter how, you have to find a way.
Jonathan, should we read anything into the manager not travelling with the team on the bus?
It's an unusual situation. In fact, I don't think I've heard of such a situation before. Probably, as Rachel alluded to, there was a clear sense that some of those players were finding it hard to. I don't want to use a cliche, playing losing dressing rooms, playing for the manager. But as Rachel said, Jim's a guy that came and very, very immediately tried to make a statement about his own authority.
Yeah.
And he was in charge. And I think you have to back that up then if you're going to be that guy, by leadership and making great decisions that people can fall behind. And I felt that that side of his management was not quite followed up with what we saw on the pitch. It wasn't followed up with clear patterns of what he wanted to do, with a clear direction on the field. I mean, maybe it's not necessarily Jim's fault that there was such a flux with the transfer policy, but for someone that wanted to be so strong off the pitch, it wasn't necessarily a sort of clear direction on it. I didn't feel. So going back to the bus thing, I think it's just part of the sense, obvious sense, I suppose, that maybe not all of them, but certainly plenty of them were finding it hard to be in that relationship by that point with Jim. And I think that it's not just Darvel, it's like just Hearts or moments. The collapse against Rangers, just moments where it just seemed the team who didn't have that element of motivation, backbone, determination, collectivity, call it what you want, that it is a manager's job to foster. It is players' responsibility to show it as well. But you can see it when teams have got the culture right, you can see it. And when the culture's wrong, you also see it. And, there's a million different explanations, but I think it just comes down to the team it's not a team, it's not been built properly. And that does ultimately come to the manager.
So it's all been done and dusted. Obviously, Jim got sacked. So let's try and turn things a little bit more positively. Obviously, they put Barry Robson in charge with Steve Agnew coming in as well, and Scott Anderson to assist. But what I found really interesting, Terry, right from the off, and Barry actually came out and said it himself, that he sanctioned the loan move for our captain, Anthony Stewart. I personally was a little bit surprised by Vinny Bissauin going back to Holland. I heard that there were that there were issues in training, that he could have trained an awful lot better. But I don't think I've ever heard of a situation where a captain of a team who's only been there 6 months all of a sudden is surplus to requirements. But I thought that was quite a bold statement of intent from Barry Robson. What do you think?
Well, it was a pretty stunning development. I think even in the state that we'd managed to get ourselves into, I think we were all a little surprised by that one. It's not very often that 6 months in to having a new captain and your manager announcing very confidently that the easiest thing to fix is going to be the defence, that the centre half you brought in as captain is shipped off back to England. So, I mean, if anything, I think Barry Robson was probably doing a little bit of what Jim Goodwin tried to do, and that was say, okay, I'm in charge now. This is my team. That guy's obviously not part of what I see as the future. And I mean, that's part one. They got rid of Anthony Stewart. They went straight in and got two centre halves. And I think the club was painfully aware that all our problems, in my opinion, stemmed from having a very, very weak core at the back. And I think actually even there were games actually where we won. The game where we beat Hearts 2-0 at Pittodrie. And, everybody went away happy. We saw Duke obviously make that run where he left the boy looking like he'd broken his leg. And the truth was, Hearts missed an absolute raft of sitters in that game. It was by no means that we dominated that game and controlled it. We looked a little bit bomb scare at the back. Unfortunately, that bomb scare issue has been a common theme. So I actually think, as maybe surprising as it felt at the time, I think it was 100%, albeit bold, but a smart move, which was, it clearly isn't working. You don't need what's coming. We don't need you here. We're going to do something else. I mean, and not just that. I think Jim Goodwin, flew Anthony Stewart as his flag, as his captain, and with him out the door, I don't think it was going to get any easier for Anthony Stewart. Every mistake I think was now going to be overanalyzed, and confidence was not going to be easily bred in that dressing room with him as the captain.
Mm. What do you think of Barry Robson's effects so far, Rachel? Jonathan was right. There was a sort of an afterflow to the St Mirren game, but from there, I think his effect has been nothing but positive. Do you agree? You're on mute.
Sorry. I think it's been how you would expect it to go in the sense of he's someone who's been at the club as a player and now as a coach for a long time. He knows the ins and outs. He knows everybody in there. He's worked hard. I've seen his sessions. I've seen, well, not all of them, obviously. I've seen some of his training sessions when I've been in and around, the Aberdeen area, and I've been at the Sports Village, or I've seen some of the work that he's done, and he loves trying to develop players, and he's got very methodical methods, I think. And I think when you're in a period where there's a lot of volatility, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of stress, he's quite a calm guy. In that, when he speaks quite slowly and quite deliberately. And as I say, he likes structure. He likes, discipline, honesty, hard working. And I think that was probably something that the team just needed. They just needed something that felt probably a little bit safe, because, when you feel the weight of not doing well, you feel the weight of disappointment, you're low in confidence, everyone, anything you do and everything you do is getting scrutinised to the absolute limit. You just need that little bit of a feeling of like someone's got their arm around you and you're going to be fine, we're going to get through it, and we're going to get through it together. And I think that's what he's done. And as you say, that we've probably got a good result, and now we're probably just trying to find that little bit of that steadiness to get more results, because at the end of the day, we've seen Aberdeen this season play brilliantly. We've seen them have good games, so there's great players there. There's players that are really capable of doing, they've got the creativity, they can score goals, and those are the hard things. It's a lot easier to give a team structure and be disciplined and hard to beat, and sometimes it's really hard to have those creative players. We have those. And so I think he's done really well, and I'm not surprised, because I think he's someone that a lot of people really respect in the Northeast at Aberdeen, and that includes a number of those players there who will have already known him before he actually stepped up and into that role.
So Jonathan, where do the Football Monitoring Board go from here? What sort and what type of manager should they be targeting?
Well, I think it's right to take time, which is what's happening, and echo what Rachel said about Barry Robson. Somebody with a lot of respect who knows what we need to do right now, and made some pretty, I think, some very sensible decisions following St Mirren. You can see, a guy that can structure a team, got Shinnie back in, got Hayes in, changed the defence, new goalkeeper. I think we're in safe hands there for the time being. So it's right to give Barry Robson a go. I don't think there's any short-term need to rush towards something. For me, and I've felt this about Aberdeen for years, I think this is an opportunity for the club to not just think about changing the manager or who the next manager should be, but actually what the club should be. For years, I think we've sort of drifted around, kind of not I don't feel we've understood what Aberdeen should be, and I think there's a clear identity. I'm going to sound old, but I was there watching the Fergie era, and that to me is the identity of the club. It's playing that kind of attacking but intense football with young players, a club that's got to aspire to being the third force, but better than that when it can be, and to winning things. I think we need to set targets, aspirations, what type of football we're going to play, who's going to be in the team, how we're going to run things, and then the manager follows from that. Alan Burrows has come in as CEO, which is welcome. I think there's a new voice was needed, and he brings a lot of experience in Scottish football. There's still the question about whether we need a proper director of football, and I would suggest we probably do, but they're not easy to find. But this has got to be, if it's going to be any positive, it's got to be that the month that we're talking about is the line that Aberdeen draw. No more of this nonsense. And we use this time to figure out what Aberdeen should be going forward, and then appoint a new manager accordingly, and then start to sign players on that basis, and not just, as Rachel said, we've actually got some talented players in the squad. The recruitment hasn't been dreadful universally. It's just been scattergun. So we've got some good ones, and we've got some not so good ones. So I just think that there's a lot that needs now to be sort of clarified, but it's an opportunity to do so.
Terry, it's a really interesting point from Jonathan. Let's just draw a line under what's happened in January 2023, because there is only one way to go now. And I think everybody's got to come together as a collective. And the point about our identity is really interesting. And Jonathan's absolutely right, I think.
Well, of course, I worked at the club for a number of years. And as an Aberdeen fan, not only did that feel like a privilege, but you really get a sense when you're working at Pittodrie that there is a standard, there is a vision which I think every single member of staff shares, which is there's a deep feeling of pride being part of that club. The walls are covered with images of very famous men holding up very famous trophies, and it has to be the benchmark. I don't think it's enough to narrowly be better than the likes of Hearts or Hibs. We have to be not just in the third, but we have to be not so much close to the ones behind us as trying to be a lot closer at the ones ahead of us. I don't think there's any shame in losing the Old Firm, but I would like to see us a lot closer than we are and stamping an authority as a football team. And honestly, there's no other team in Scotland has the experience of doing that more than we do outside the Old Firm. So I think Jonathan's absolutely right. I think that the club does have an identity. I don't think it's so much a crisis, and I know that sounds ridiculous after the results we've had, but thankfully the likes of Darvel are once in a generation, and it is going to, I genuinely feel it's going to set in motion a pretty epic set of changes at the club. I think Burrows coming in, I think, is could end up being a masterstroke. And I think with him in that role, if with his experience, if he feels further changes are required, I'm sure he's going to have his own ideas, and I'm sure he's not going to be shy about bringing that to the board. And this is an opportunity for change. And I think that the hierarchy at Aberdeen Football Club is going to be open to those suggestions, because nobody wants another January ever again. Certainly not for a very long time.
Rachel, you've got exactly 2 minutes. Do you echo the sentiments of Terry and Jonathan?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I do think that one of the biggest pieces of getting us back to where we feel we believe the club should be, I think it is mindset. And I think probably the closest really got to that was under those few years under Derek McInnes. And I think a big part was the fact he was a strong character. And I think the biggest thing that he gave the players, that he gave the fans, was the feeling of belief. And I think that's absolutely huge. And probably the biggest way to sum it up on where we are just now is when you watch back that Rangers game that wasn't too long ago, when we ended up losing those two really late goals. We were the better team that day, especially in most of the second half when we took the lead. And that's mentality. That's belief, because as the game went later and later, you just saw us slip further behind, and you could see it. And I remember that day, had we got the result there, the points difference between us and Rangers would have been very, very tight. And within 3 or 4 weeks, it was ridiculous. It was huge. The gap was huge. you know, we fell away, we weren't even in third place, but that shows that a club like Aberdeen does attract good players. That there is a genuine ability for us to compete with a lot of these teams, and we've all watched us, as you say, beat the Old Firm, and yeah, we've all seen us lose several times as well. But we're definitely a club that has the capacity to attract and be back to playing that football and being back expecting trophies more regularly than what we've seen, certainly in my lifetime. But the toughest part is that mentality piece.
Yeah. Thank you, all of you, for your contribution tonight. It's very much appreciated, and hopefully we shall see each other again all very soon. Stay safe. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
Mate.
everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, Terry. Cheers, Rachel. Thanks, Alan.
If you have not already subscribed to Ali Begg AB TV, I would be absolutely thrilled if you would please consider doing so. We are motoring towards 2,500 subscribers, and then we're hoping to kick on to reach 3,000. We have so much planned. Come and join us on what is a very exciting journey. We are done. Thank you so much for watching Beg to Differ January review. All things considered, I hope you enjoyed the watch, and I'll see you again very soon. Take care for now. Bye bye.